Welcome to the ISM Rochester Lunch and Learn webinar series. Our program for today will be Principled Persuasion, the Power of Positive Negotiation Tactics. Please be sure to participate today, and please put your comments and questions in the chat box. If you would like to ask your question live, just make sure to raise your hand, and when it's at that particular time, Brandon will call on you and then we'll have you speak live. Our speaker today will be Brandon Hummons. I've known Brandon for a few years. He's great. Brandon has both his CPSM and his CPSD certifications and his own consulting business as well, Hummons Consulting. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Brandon, where I would like him to give you a little more detail of his background.
Thank you very much for that, Kathy. Really appreciate it. I am ecstatic to be here. This is a topic that I'm deeply passionate about. I'm passionate about all things procurement. But before we get into that, I want you guys to know a little bit about me. I'll start off with some of the general stuff, and then I'll tell you some things that I usually don't open up my introductions with. So currently, I am the IT procurement lead at Tropicana Brands Group. I lead our entire IT procurement department, and I report up to our CIO. So I do things all category management and strategy development, contract negotiations, payments, things of that nature. And I work very closely with finance, like many of us procurement people do. I've been in procurement for over a decade now. I think it's around 12, 13 years so far. I started my career off at Allstate. And then I went on to another organization called QBE Insurance. And then I moved on to a couple other different places. But I spent a good amount of time as a senior consultant with a company called Source One, which was then purchased by CoreCentric. During that time, I was able to learn a lot about the world of procurement. I was doing IT and telecom, which also spilled into other indirect categories. And the benefit that I often saw with that role as a senior consultant is that I was able to see coast to coast different businesses, how they operated, what they were doing, what they were looking for, the suppliers that they were dealing with. And I was consistently just doing these strategic negotiations and projects for them. I was often just an extension of their procurement team. So I often look at that senior consulting role as like 12 jobs all in one, because I was able to do so many different things. And I took a lot of that learning, and I was able to continue to spread knowledge by working with ISM, but then also work on my own continuous improvement. After I was a senior consultant, I went on to become the indirect category manager at CF Industries, where I was doing everything from HR, sales, finance, marketing, and IT. And then I was also handling a lot of our supplier sustainability practices. I was working very closely with our vendor at the time, EcoVadis, and making sure that we were developing a strong supplier sustainability program. From there, went on to Tropicana Brands Group, where I'm at now, and we'll see what happens next. Like Kathy said, I also run my own consulting firm. So I still continue to have clients outside of Tropicana. I've worked with companies like GCC out of Colorado, that's a global concrete company. I've worked with utility companies like San Diego Gas and Electric. I've worked with Canon USA. I worked with a lot of different companies through ISM, teaching and talking and having these deep conversations about procurement and what we need to do past that. So that's my typical intro. You need to know who I am, what I've done, the type of work. I do a lot of teaching, right? So I typically do teachings about twice a month, but I'm also doing a webinar series, and it's all around humanizing procurement. So when Kathy and I first talked about this webinar, this Lunch and Learn, I said, let's connect it to that. The reason, I'll tell you guys two things real quick. And actually, there's a story I want to start off with, which is why this all got started. But before that, I want to tell you guys something that I typically don't tell people, is that back in high school, which was a long time, it was, what, 16, 18 years ago at this point, I was in debate. I did policy debate all throughout high school, all 4 years. By the end of it, I was actually the top ranked debater in Chicago. I went on to become a national debater. And the reason I bring that up is because that is when my passion for understanding the complexities of language first started to emerge. I went on to become a speaker. I've opened up for Michelle Obama. I've opened up for a couple musicians when they were giving their motivational speeches. I've opened up for some entrepreneurial organizations. And through all of these experiences, I started to really learn how to connect with people, how to fully understand what's on their mind, what do they want to hear, and how can I be genuine and authentic with myself. I never want to change who I am just to fit the setting, but rather I want to give you the best version of myself for the situation and to fit the occasion, right? So that's where some of that other experience comes from. The story that I want to tell you guys is a little bit about why this all started, and then I'm going to jump into the topic here. I'm married. We've been married for a little over 5 years now. My wife and I, a couple of years ago, went on vacation together, and when I got back to work, um, I sat down on my desk. I started catching up on all my projects and whatnot. I'm emailing and messaging back my stakeholders. And as I'm typing out through our internal messaging system to one of my stakeholders, I'm just, pretty much giving her an update or asking for something, but starting the communication for the week. During that moment, my manager at the time walks over, and this is the person over all of corporate procurement, right? So the one I report directly up to. He says, "Hey, what are you up to?" I said, "Oh, I'm about to email this person back." And he says, "Oh, by the way, when you were on vacation, she actually passed away. You're going to be working with Joe now." And then he walked away, right? I was left stunned. I didn't know how to react. We had talked about our families. We had talked about our children. We had talked about our plans. And to hear that this woman passed away and she was being replaced so quickly, I didn't know what to do in that situation. So when I think about this moment here, when I think about this webinar series and all the other things that I'm doing within procurement, I want to humanize the way that we do business with each other, right? I want to humanize these interactions that we have with our stakeholders. I would like to humanize the interactions that we have with our suppliers and the way that we engage with each other and our peers, because I think that ultimately this matters. Sales and procurement, those are the two fundamental parts of the economy. Those are the two pieces of the world that comes together in order to create something magical, right? We have a capitalist system in America. It works for us. It's how we engage with each other. It's the exchange of goods and services. And if we don't see that as a human, an intrinsic interaction between us, we have lost a little bit of meaning there, right? We're not just numbers. We're not just emails. We're not just pieces of things to get things done, right? We are actual people. So that's why I want to actually have this deeper conversation around how do we improve that? How do we find positive ways to communicate with each other and then eventually get the best impacts? By the end of this, one of the key things that I want you guys to really walk away with is I know what to do to connect with people better. And I would love to hear your suppliers say in the future, I felt good about that conversation. How often does that happen, right? How often do suppliers walk away from you and say, I felt good about that interaction? Not, I got beat up over price, or they demanded all this stuff out of me, or they only were interested in getting what they wanted. But no, this is a two-way street. We have to figure out how do we care about people in our daily lives and use that care, emotion, and empathy to get to better negotiation outcomes. The biggest thing I've always said for the last 10 years, and it was my very first boss who told me about this. And it's one of the old antidotes, right? Where they say you catch more flies with honey rather than vinegar, right? You don't need to convince them that, this is the better tasting thing. You just show them. I am an adamant believer of that. I do believe that when you treat people the right way, you go about this negotiation the right way, you're going to have ultimately better outcomes. So let's dive into that. And I first want to start off with what is emotional intelligence? So that's all of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be describing emotional intelligence and then connecting that to what does that mean for procurement and negotiations. I want you guys to figure out, here are the actual things that we can do in this world in order to connect better. So let's break it down. There's a lot of words on the screen here, everybody. We don't have to read it all. You can read it as I talk to you about it, but I do want to walk through these 5 core competencies. This is going to be the core of our understanding of emotional intelligence. So once we have this base, we'll then be able to move on to what this looks like for procurement. The first step is having some sense of self-awareness. You have to recognize your own emotions, be able to understand their impact on other people, and then that is the beginning of your journey, right? You can't do anything for anyone else if you don't understand yourself. The next piece is self-regulation, managing these emotions to respond appropriately. I once had this manager, kind of near the beginning of my career, where we had a strong difference of opinion about how to actually get things done. right? He was a little bit of a micromanager. He was extremely successful in his role. He, had been in that role for a reason, right? He had gotten his promotions and became a senior manager for a reason. So he had these things that were really good about him. The hard part for me is our behaviors were so different. And there were some moments that we just could not connect properly. And part of that was the inability of managing emotions in every situation. I specifically remember, and I'm a younger person at this time, I was in my early 20s when this was happening, where we got out of a meeting and I had communicated to the supplier, here are the objectives that we're trying to achieve. And I'm doing this from my perspective very strategically, right? I still need obviously his guidance to get this done, but I'm doing this strategically. I'm doing this from the way I know how to do it. And long story short, he yelled at me, right? He kind of blew up, and it was because I didn't do it to the T in which he wanted it done. Now, here's the thing, everybody. The end outcome of that negotiation was extremely successful. And it caused, and I talk about self-regulation here, he came back and apologized. And he said, I should have regulated. I shouldn't have responded that way. I should have just had the conversation with you, right? That sort of peer interaction, that is what gets into our emotional intelligence. I do commend him for being able to say, hey, I didn't respond correctly, and then correcting that situation after. But the point here is that we need to examine ourselves during these everyday moments and try to realize, did we make a mistake? The other side is motivation. What internal drive do you have to go beyond some of these external rewards? What do I mean by that? When I was in college, I was the president of our Black Student Union, and I had an internship at Allstate, right? So junior to senior year summer, that was my internship. I went back to school senior year, became president of the Black Student Union. And when I would keep in contact with the boss I had as an intern. And one of the things I told her was, hey, I'm having a lot of trouble leading this team of people, right? And I said, you are a great leader. What's the difference from me leading this team of people than you leading your team of people? And she said, well, Brandon, everybody gets paid here, right? That was a huge motivating factor of them doing good work. There was that external piece. Now, I couldn't pay people a part of this student-run club. I couldn't use that to motivate them to do more and do better. So instead, she said, and we discussed this, we have to figure out what is their actual motivation for being there, and then connect with them on that level, right? So now, as you guys are all listening to this, do two things as we go through this. You don't need to speak to me about it. I just want you to think about it. One, what is your motivation? What is driving you to do your job? Focusing on that. Focusing on that. And then as you go through your other negotiations, figure out what motivates others. I want you to figure out and try to dive into and discover if it's beyond money, right? When you can figure out that motivation beyond money, that's perfect. And here's the thing, if you start having conversations with people about this, one of the key things that you may discover is that the questions that you ask them help them discover their motivation. For me, my motivation is I love helping people. Procurement helps people. It helps people do their jobs better. It helps the organization become more profitable. It helps people keep their job in a lot of situations, right? If I can save a whole bunch of money, that's headcount that we don't have to reduce when times get hard. I love helping people, and I love when people walk away feeling better about themselves and feeling more empowered. That's my motivation. So when I talk to suppliers, sometimes I ask them that question, right? What do you want to get out of this outside of more money, more sales? Well, Brandon, I want to learn a little bit more about the industries. I want to establish myself as an expert in what I do. It's like, all right, well, let's have more conversations, right? Let's not make everything about you trying to sell me something, but let me teach you a little bit about Tropicana, for example. Let me teach you a little bit about what we look for when we buy data, for example. Let me teach you a little bit about the strategy that goes into building out our IT network infrastructure, right? You want to become an expert? Let's talk about that because that fits with your motivation. So now, right, as a negotiator, I've given you something. I've given you something as a supplier that's beyond just the business. I've given you the knowledge, I've given you the expertise, and these are things that you said that motivate you and that you want. So we're already getting ahead of ourselves with how do we use this, but that's the example of how we put that forward. And then empathy. Empathy to me should have been number one. Sorry for not putting it up there, but connecting with people, understanding their emotions, that is super important. You need to understand how that feels sometimes. So I'll get into a quick story. I had an 8:30 meeting this morning. Well, I actually had a 7:30 meeting this morning and an 8:30 meeting this morning, but the 8:30 one It was sent to me at 11:30 last night, right? I'm sitting there, I'm getting ready for bed. Actually, I was seasoning some food because I'm going to be cooking a little bit later, and I wanted the food to get seasoned. So I was staying up late seasoning food. I look at my phone, I'm like, huh, you sent me a meeting at 11:30 at night for 8:30 tomorrow. What could this be about? My empathy kicked in and said, this must be important. This is coming from a supplier. It's about, essentially, in short, she's getting a lot of pressure because when they initially set up their invoices and their payments, it was done incorrectly, and now they can't get paid, right? And we've been trying to solve this problem, but the hard part for us is that a lot of this was caused by their inaccuracies. So my empathy, when I got on the phone with her, I said, hey, let's talk about what are you going through? What's on your mind, right? And then I think it was so important to say, I understand what you're saying, and I understand how that could be difficult and the emotions that you might be feeling right now, right? I'll get into another piece here in a second, and another slide on what we say. But the biggest thing that I think is important is saying what they said back to them, right? So when I'm doing this empathy, I'm not just saying I understand and I feel you, but I'm actually saying what the actual issues that they're going through and how they feel. And then social skills, managing relationships to achieve these mutual goals that we have. Nobody likes a friend. That's a very general statement, but in general, right? People usually don't like friends where it's not mutual. If you're my friend and I'm only giving things to you, I'm the only one calling you, I'm only checking in on you, and you're not doing any of that for me, it's not really a mutual friendship, right? And so when we think about these social skills, it doesn't really work that much. When we, if you're thinking about this right now, think about the way that you usually start calls off. I love the small talk in the beginning. I used to loathe it. I used to hate having to, hey, how was your day? What's the weather like over there? No, let's not do that. Let's actually talk about how we are as people, right? What's actually going on in your life? Let me actually ask you about this. Let me actually remember it. And then hopefully you do the same and we can have a good exchange of dialogue there, right? People sometimes say, well, I'm busy. I don't have time for this. It's a part of our job, everybody. It's part of being in procurement. It's a part of developing those relationships and understanding people, because people don't care what you know until they know that you care, right? So if you're talking to a supplier and you're wanting certain things out of them, do you even care? How do you show that? Through these conversations and that mutual benefit and respect there. So we use all of this to understand and achieve better outcomes during our negotiations. What does that look like for us, everybody? Let's start with the empathy side, right? Understanding the counterpart's perspective. I want to dive a little bit more into that previous example that I gave you, right? Where, and I want to get a little bit detailed into it because this is going to be the area that I want to spend the most time on with our time today here. There is going to be a moment where I ask you guys some questions too, right? So Kathy will open up the dialogues and she'll let people talk. We're not at that stage yet, but I want you to start thinking about it, everyone. I want you to start thinking about certain situations, scenarios that you've gone through where that human interaction and that connection ended up mattering, right? I had a webinar with somebody about 2 weeks ago, Roderick Nelson. He's in the HR space. And what we did is we collaborated to figure out how can we provide information to people around all the stuff that's, I would say, the secrets of the HR world, right? So he's been in HR for probably 20, 30 years at this point. He's seen and heard it all, everyone. So when we sat down to talk, I wanted to understand parts of his perspective that were secrets. The conversation was great. But I think I want to talk a little bit more about the after part that happened. About 2 weeks later, so this is actually yesterday, he called me. Well, last week he said, let's talk, and I want to get your feedback, right? So we recorded the session, I rewatched the video, and when Monday rolled around, we had a conversation, and he said, hey, Brandon, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk and to be on your webinar. He wants to start his own podcast, and he wants to become a professional motivational speaker. That's been a long dream and journey of his. So part of what he wanted to do there was get some 360 feedback, right? He says, hey, I went out and I showed the video, the recording to a couple of my close friends and family. He says, overall, very positive feedback. But one of his friends, who's a doctor, said, hey, Roderick, you toned down your vocabulary a little bit, it seems, right? And you didn't really express yourself as intellectual as I know that you are. So when I heard this, I said two things. One, I wanted to make sure he knew I was listening. So I said, hey, is this, and part of me is, I know Roderick, I've known him for a while, so I can joke around with this guy, kind of can be a little bit more casual. So I said, is he calling you dumb? Right? Is he saying that, you're not speaking intelligently enough? You're not, kind of elevating yourself for it? And he says, no, I don't think that. But part of the reason I say that is because I'm trying to understand counterparts' perspectives and use some of that active listening, right? So that's the key here, everybody. So I asked Roderick, hey, is he calling you dumb? Right. So I'm trying to understand, hey, what's the perspective that's coming here? Right. And he says, no, I think that maybe he just didn't fully understand what we were going for. I'm like, yeah, guess what? Our audience is going to be people that are classified as emerging professionals, 30 and under usually. And a lot of the times it was people just entering the workforce for the first time in a professional setting. It may have been people kind of switching over. So we thought about our audience and we thought about what types of words should we use? How deep should we get into some of the lingo of our industries and whatnot? Not very deep. We want to get deep into the content portion. That perspective there mattered because it determined what we could learn from that situation. So Roger went back to his doctor friend, and now they're having that dialogue to understand various perspectives about the situation. All of that is super important because the key there, though, is we look for feedback. That is so key here. Now, the biggest thing that I will say is transform. How do you transform your negotiation? So we have the first bullet point there that says from adversarial to collaborative, and then from zero sum to shared success outcomes. I love this portion. I love it. I love it so much. I always think that negotiation should be win-win. Like I said before, some of the best feedback that I continuously receive from my suppliers is we left this conversation feeling good. And that's because I said to them, I always say, what is it that you want out of this? And give me a couple things, because I'm going to say no to some of them, right? I'll always say no. And that's part of it all, though, right? Right? Being a successful negotiator is that we learn when to say no, but most importantly, we know how and when to say yes. And then if you do this the right way, your no's sound like yeses. I was teaching a class one day out in California, and we were deciding on breaks, right? We were actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So I told everybody, hey, instead of a 10-minute break, no. I said, instead of a 5-minute break, I can give you guys 10 minutes. And because there's a room full of negotiators, somebody popped up and said, can we get 15? So I can't give you 15, I can give you 12, right? That no sounded a little like a yes, because it wasn't a hard no. It's how can we easily and quickly compromise? Funny thing is about the situation, we all pointed out, hey, we just negotiated very quickly, even on the time for the break of the session, right? You're going to negotiate every single step, but how do you make certain things sound differently? I'm going to give 2 stories about my wife. One is going to come a little bit later, but I often talk to her about how can we communicate better with each other. And I said to her, my wife loves telling me no, right? It's like her thing. She's proud of it sometimes, and that's fine. She tells me yes to a lot of other stuff. But I try to work with her on saying, instead of a no, do a yes or a yes and, or a yes but. You know what I mean? What does this mean? And we're going to relate this back to our negotiations in a second, everybody. I have not been to a music concert since I was a teenager. So there's this artist that I really like. I've been listening to him a lot lately. He's coming to Chicago. I said, hey, I would really love to go to this this concert. She said, no, don't want to do it. And eventually we did end up getting the tickets. So that's the long story short. But I talked to her about this and I said, well, why not? Long story short, the coaching through that conversation, instead of the no, it then became yes, but you need to help me find a babysitter, right? Yes, but if they're coming on these 3 different days, can we make it this day? Because I have a lot of stuff going on this day, right? So all of these different things, you can say yes, and then transform a little bit about the conditions and requirements of that yes. You, as a negotiator, as your own person, are allowed to do that. And that yes brings you so much closer to other things, right? Valentine's Day is coming up now. because we were able to work out a yes there, there's very little that I'm going to say no with this, right? And then often we just got to go with the flow with certain things. That yes is powerful, the same way that the no is powerful. We just have to be very strategic about how to use it. We don't want to walk into a supplier negotiation. Here's another quick thing, everybody. I did this before. I walked into supplier negotiation, and pretty much what I was trying to do was save some money. It was not a big contract. It was about $60,000 or so. And the outcome of that negotiation was we ended up only paying about $37,000. And part of this process, right, is I started off as an adversary, but then I positioned myself to become a collaborator and an ally. I started off as an adversary because I said to him, hey, your pricing is way out of line. And we signed this contract already, but for the renewal that's going to happen in about 6 months, we might not renew because you guys are really cheating us on price. What can we do to get there? And then, during that conversation, I honed in on, if we can't get to an agreement, I'm going to advise that we cancel the contract. I'm going to advise that we end the relationship. So I had this hard adversarial portion in the beginning, and then I eventually switched it and I said, but I don't want to do that. I would want for us to remain in the contract together for the next 5 years, if that's what it takes. But I want to feel that it's fair. And so when I put out that $37,000 target, I always believe in targets, everybody. That's something else. I also teach data-driven negotiation classes. And in procurement, this is a hill I will die on, people. Put out a target. Don't tell suppliers to give your best and final. It's not the 90s anymore. That's what we did back then. Give them a target. I have 100% of the time been more successful giving a supplier a target, but I'm also giving them a fair target. They don't know how much they might be off. So when I said, hey, I want us to target 37,000, I was very transparent with them. I said to them, I'm not lowballing you here. I'm looking at our number of users. I'm looking at the duration of the contract. I'm looking at the purpose of the contract and what we're actually going to be using your services for. And I'm looking at our benchmark data. I said, we pay for these Gartner services. We pay for other procurement benchmark services, and we have internal benchmarking information. I want to work with you, supplier. I want to work with you, and I want to be fair, and I want to go back to our business unit, and I want to sing your praises of how collaborative you are and how great of a partner you are. Just help me get there. Help me get there by understanding the data that we took, and I'm giving it to you as our target. And we had a much better conversation because I said to him, I want to work this out. Here's how I want to work this out. Here's how I want to connect with you and keep that conversation and keep that contract going. And he says, you know what, Brandon? I don't think you are lowballing us. What you're saying makes sense. I think we can do it. Let me get that approval, but I'm pretty sure. And he got the approval and we were able to do it. And through that conversation, we saved quite a bit of money. And it was only a 30-minute conversation. It took about 30 minutes of prep, looking up that benchmark information and pulling together those details. But the most important part is being very strategic throughout that process, understanding my word choices, understanding the negotiation leverage and positioning that I had in order to become successful there. The other piece is continue to practice it. Continue to understand what those deeper needs are, right? If I'm talking to this other person where we move from 60 to 37, I'm also understanding, what do you want to get out of this and what can I give you? Two things that I was able to give him: one, a longer term contract, an early renewal, and an introduction to the business unit where he wanted to expand some of the business into. I had to see value in that before making that introduction, just as a side, but I did see value in that. And so therefore, it was also another win for me because I was able to say, hey, director over here, here's a supplier that we're already doing business with that's demonstrated they want to be good partners. I think you guys should have a conversation. Your choice, but I think you guys should have a conversation. I'd done some other favors for that director. They said, Brandon, I'll do that for you. They had a conversation. Now they're in business together. Everyone wins when we figure out how to collaborate. That's just the notion of it all. Let's dive in a little bit deeper here, everybody. I want to really understand what some of the strategies that we need to use in order to connect intelligence with your emotions and how you use language to negotiation and procurement. So I already gave you a couple examples there, but I want to dive in So some of the actual techniques here. And then eventually I want to talk to you a little bit about personal and professional, right? So this is conveying and interpreting emotions. When you step into a negotiating room, that table, whether it's in person, over video, I often urge you to do negotiations over video unless you're strategically not on video for a very particular reason, right? But I want you to do this because all of the subtle things that you do play into this negotiation. Whether you get on there and you're folding your arms and frowning the whole time, right? That's positioning. That's you trying to condition your supplier by using your subtle body languages in different moments. And then whether you're open and smiling, making eye contact, telling them about your personal stories, all of that is conditioning. But what are the tactics? What are the strategies? Active listening. I mentioned this a few times before, but it's fully engaging with the message. It's fully understanding what are they trying to communicate beyond just the words. I want to go back to this other example that I gave earlier around the supplier that was having those payment issues. Originally, this was brought to me because one of my direct reports on my team, she said, Brandon, I want you involved in the supplier conversation. It seems that they're upset about something. I don't know how to work through it. And I said, all right, you're escalating this to me. I will help you out. Let's figure this out together. We got on the call. And at first, I was going to try to use this as a development for my direct report, right? I was going to say, let's see how she responds to this. This is my first time stepping into the situation, getting on the call. And it became a thing that I realized after the supplier was doing a lot of talking. Supplier was doing a lot of talking, really a lot of complaining. And she was sounding so stressed. And she was just like, hey, all of these things are happening because of these different payment issues, because, so Tropicana, by the way, everybody, used to be owned by Pepsi. It's now owned by this European company called New Tiger LLC. All of this is public knowledge. I'm not giving anything away. This has been 2 years now. But we had some of this information listed as, hey, you guys are contracting with New Tiger. And they said, well, we thought we were contracting with Tropicana, and now it's all messed up in our systems and blah, blah, blah. But after it all, when it comes into active listening and really empathetic reflection, I said to her, you're getting a lot of heat from your management, aren't you? You haven't been paid by us because of this little mix up and mess up. You are getting a lot of people coming to you as the account manager saying, where is the money? And she said, yes, that is what's happening. They need a punching bag. They need somebody to blame, and I don't know what to do. And this is a supplier talking to me about this because I'm trying to connect. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to break down all of these, policies and procedures that she's talking about trying to do. And I said, what is the core of what's happening here? Right. So that's what I understood first. And once I said that, once I connected and understood and demonstrated that I understood the problem, her guard was down. And that's a good thing. And not in a manipulative way, but in an influential way. Right. And just a quick side, everybody, there's a difference between manipulation and influence. Right. Manipulation is I'm going to try to get you to do what I want you to do without any thought about your well-being, right, and the outcome for you. But influence is I'm going to try to encourage you to do something that potentially benefits both of us, but it at least benefits you, right? So I was going through this process, and to me, the part about it was, how do we influence and encourage the situation correctly? And it's by understanding that we're on the same team. And for me, it was, I identified the problem from an emotional perspective, and I broke down some of the official stuff that was going on in the background. And I said, you know what? I want to make sure that I solve your problem. We're going to figure out why this happened. You can tell them that we're working on it, and check in with me in a couple days, and I'll give you an update. We were eventually able to fix parts of the problem. Eventually, certain things started to break a little bit because we had other things going on in the background. But the main point of this is we saw an outcome that worked for us both, right? And so through that, though, we get to our third point, sharing information to build trust and openness. But this is strategic disclosure, everybody. You don't just give it all away. You give parts of it away, parts of it that make sense. I love doing this part because I hate the idea of lying, right? I don't agree with it. I don't think that you should do it in business. I don't think as a procurement person or a negotiator that you should ever lie. But what you can do is strategically disclose certain parts of information. When do I do this the most? As far as another example, is I might give you our budget, right? If I know that our budget is less than your cost and less than your price, that's my strategic disclosure of information. And then, so I was saying this before to Kathy, but we just announced our new CPO this morning, right? New Chief Procurement Officer. And a lot of my suppliers, especially for some, so being in IT, I source anything IT related, software, hardware, professional services that deal with IT, all that good stuff. And part of that is our procurement tools and software, right, everybody? So I'm doing a couple RFPs for these different procurement tools and whatnot. I have some of my favorites. I won't disclose any of those here, but as I'm negotiating with them, I'm communicating strategically about certain things. I tell them, hey, we're about to get a new CPO. Our current CPO is retiring. I can't make a decision until XYZ date. And I'm going to use that time to continue to look at other partners, potential partners, examine the landscape, understand the environment, increase my knowledge. And that to me is part of the strategic disclosure process, because they may say like, oh, he's open with us. He's telling us about all this stuff going on in his business. Yes, but when Q2 rolls around, end of Q2, that's when your discounts are going to roll in, aren't they? So many businesses are going to give discounts at the end of the quarter. And if I can time out when I need to give you an answer, because I'm coordinating internally and I'm coordinating with my suppliers and I'm coordinating with the RFP results, I can use all of this timing strategically to get to a better outcome, right? I know that once that CPO gets hired, he gets in place, he's going to need some time to get his feet wet. He's going to need some time to establish himself. There might be other competing objectives and goals. I'm going to use that to my advantage and use that timing to then, well, one, gather his opinion and thoughts, strategically disclose that information to say, here's where we're leaning, here's what we're trying to do, but then also the timing of it to line up with when I can get certain discounts a little bit more, right? When you build trust, reduce conflict, you're going to get to better outcomes and often more innovative solutions. That's just what happens throughout the process here. And I love it. I think that's a key part of what it means to be a negotiator. We're coming up to the end a little bit soon, guys. So this is the part, Kathy, that I need your help with a little bit. I want to start asking people some questions, right? I want to talk a bit about some case studies, some things that we've actually done. And I want to hear from you guys, right? So I've kind of already jumped the gun because I've told you a little bit about some case studies before where this made a lot of sense and whatnot, where we are talking about sustainability. So I want to give you an example of a past role that I had where my active listening and understanding the supplier concerns was greatly to our advantage and then actually produced some really good outcomes for us. Like I said before, I was handling the sustainability program at a previous role. And through that, I had some suppliers who were really concerned about their scores. So through this program and through the supplier that we were using, every vendor in the system had a score out of 100, right? We had thresholds, like you could get a 45 out of 100 and still pass for us, right? So whenever we had a score that was below 45, it was concerning and they did become at risk for being pushed out of our supplier preference program, right? Through some of these conversations, I was able to work out some really good outcomes. And one of the key things that I realized through this, by connecting, having these talks, I'll use a specific situation through one of these vendors. They were one of our raw material suppliers, right? So one of the things that was bringing down their score, and I'm trying to be very confidential, right? One of the things that was bringing down their score, two things really. One, their transport, they're emitting too much CO2 during transport. And then two, hazardous waste disposal, right? Instead of just sending them, we have these canned emails, everyone, that we can just hit a button, it generates this email, it says, here's what's wrong with your score, do something about it. I had a conversation with them, right? I said, your emissions are too high and your hazardous waste is bad. Let's talk about this. What's going on? I thought this is important to you guys. They said, it is important. I said, well, why? What's the problem? Turns out, long story short, they had a very good hazardous waste policy. They just did not upload it and they didn't see the need to. They didn't think that it was serious, nor did they want to give all that information away. In my opinion, it was also partly incomplete. So connecting with them, I understood their concerns. They said, hey, we're still kind of working on parts of this. I said, well, submit what you have. They showed me what they had. Instantly, their score jumped to like 67 or something like that. Because I said, hey, your policy doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be there, right? And then they committed to continuous improvement. How do we dispose of some of this hazardous waste and other waste in general better? The other side to that is they committed then for their transport to only transport those raw materials on electric trucks. And a lot of that was achieved because we had a collaborative conversation. It was me coming up with ideas, them telling me about their processes and their struggles and some of the roadblocks and obstacles, and me saying, all right, well, I manage this program. Guess what? There's 300 other suppliers in here that I'm talking to all the time. Here's what somebody else did to solve the problem that you're going through. I'm glad we had this talk, right? I want you guys to stay in the program. I want you guys to continue to be a supplier. That's me saying what we both want, right? That's an achievable outcome that gives everybody the advantage. And I'm connecting with them on that mutual goal. We were successful, right? And to me, it was about connecting with them and being transparent in a lot of ways. So I want to hear from you guys. You don't have to, I'm hoping that maybe there'll be some additional questions at the end, everybody. We're almost 45 minutes through, right? But I want this to be a sharing environment. I did a lot of talking. I would love to figure out who else is here, who else is going to be able to kind of chime in. And then we will have questions at the very end, and I would love to answer some of your questions. But I want to hear, do you have a situation or a scenario that you went through where you feel like you connecting with that supplier on an emotional level yielded a better outcome? Does anybody want to
Just
speak to that? Or Kathy, do you have anybody in the chat or anything?
just raise your hand, and then I'll give you the permission to talk.
Wonderful. I want to just kind of leave it open for a while. I know that sometimes people are hesitant to share, but please, I kind of put the seed out there way in the beginning. Hey, think about this, and this is the moment. So there's somebody out there that's like, hey, I was having this conversation with this guy, and we connected on an emotional level, and boom, I was able to save $1 million. Who knows what it is, right? But yeah, I'm totally open to hearing from anybody in the room right now.
Just raise your hand, let us know.
And I guess while we're waiting for that, Kathy, anything like that come to mind for you when you think about, you know, connecting with people and how it could yield a better outcome as we're waiting for anybody to raise their hand?
Oh, definitely. Actually, as everybody knows, we're involved in the chapter management of our ISM boards. So you always have those kind of situations come up, especially during a board meeting.
Mm,
And you more or less, have to, what the outcome a particular board member may want on a particular issue that's going on, but the same situations actually occur in that respect as well. Um, as far as what I can share.
hmm. Interesting. What were some of the outcomes for you for that situation?
Well, you know what it is okay, I'll give you one situation. So
Hmm.
when in one of the other chapters, I'm on the New Jersey board, and I wanted to put together a new conference called a Women in Leadership Conference, but I had a predominantly male board.
Hmm.
So we actually had to do our case. And it was interesting to get the support of a lot of the males on the board to say, I think that's actually a really good program, and I think we should expand on it. But you really had to put your case and a bunch of the reasons why you felt it was would be important to our membership, and it turned out great, where they are now ecstatic because we're in our 16th year. So
Hmm.
there are different situations. I'm sure there's a lot more situations that people can talk about as in their organizations that would be a little bit different than what I'm talking about, though.
No, I love that because one of the key things there is you had to figure out what people care about, right? And I think that connecting what they care about to the processes that you're trying to put in place, that is impactful. And it's the best way, in my opinion, to do business, connecting the care to the action. And to me, that's a pretty good example.
Oh,
Anybody raise their hand yet, Kathy?
no, nothing yet. Nothing yet. I think we have a quiet audience here.
No problem at all. No problem. Well, anybody, if you do think of something along the way, feel free to raise your hand and come up with it. We are going to be getting to the very end though, right? So I want to connect this professional to personal for a second, tell you guys about a quick story here. And then the very next slide after this, everybody, is just the conclusion and me kind of giving you guys the other quick takeaways and whatnot. So what the slide talks about here is pretty much just saying the daily interactions that we go through, you should be thinking about this effective communication style, connecting with people, whether it's family discussions, personal things, even how you talk to yourself sometimes. And the main concept is, how do you foster that mutual understanding and then respect for that person through those speeches and through those talks, right? So my wife and I, like I said before, we've known each other since high school, actually, is when we met. So like most of our lives at this point. We didn't date in high school. We actually just knew each other. And then when we went to college, we went to two separate colleges. We had like a long distance relationship, was kind of on and off. And then eventually, obviously, after, we actually had a kid together, and then we got married because we were like, hey, we're dating, we're all this, let's just get married. And that was over 5 years ago. But I do think that even with that, we're still learning about each other. We're still growing. We're still practicing things. We're still trying to understand one another. And we're still trying to just work on some of these everyday negotiations. So over the weekend, right, I was thinking about this course, this class, or this webinar, sorry. And I was like, how can I just continue to practice some of these things intentionally, right? I'm always trying to do that. But I want to do it in such a way where I'm almost teaching her some of these things as well. Let's grow together and let's think about this. So Saturday, she asked me, change the laundry over to the dryer, take the clothes from the washer, put them in the dryer. Another quick note about this, it's kind of important to the story, is my sister is having a baby. So we have two kids, and one of them is only a year old, right? So his birthday's in December. It's December 23rd. So he's like a year and 2 months or something like that. And all of the clothes that we have from him, and even my older son, who's 9, we said, hey, we're going to give all of these clothes to my sister. My sister's actually older than me. So her and her husband were like, hey, we'll love to accept these clothes from you. It's our first kid and we don't know what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And my wife is a fashionista, right? If I dress myself, I look ridiculous. So she buys all the clothes for the house, and everybody gives us compliments. So she says, hey, before we give these clothes to your sister, let's wash them. And so we had them all in this bag. And so I assume what happened is she took the bag, she threw all of it into the washer, and she's busy doing something else. She's like, Brandon, go switch it over. So I go down there, and as I'm moving it all over, washer to dryer, I find a pamper. There's a pamper in the washer. The good news is it's not a used pamper. It was a fresh pamper. It looked like it looked clean. There was no debris or anything like that. It didn't rip apart, shred apart. Really good pamper then, right? It just absorbed all that liquid. It was just a thick pamper. I just threw it away. And I went to talk to her about it. But before I did that, I prefaced it and I said, hey, I'm gonna do two things with you. I'm gonna say it one way, I'm say it another way. And I'm not gonna tell you what I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna tell you these two different ways. So I said the first way, and this is a key thing, everybody, key thing about language and communication. This is personal and professional. So when you do this, even in the professional setting, remember how important and impactful it could be. First way I did this was, hey, babe, I just want to let you know that there was a pamper in the washer as I was switching it over. Just want to let you know we got to watch out for that. We don't want that to happen. But I got it switched over, and the clothes all look clean. The pamper wasn't used. I threw it away. It's all good. And when the dryer's done, I'll take that out and I'll set that aside to give to my sister. That was way number one. Seemed very simple, very straightforward, but there are a few word choices that I made intentionally about that. Now, number two, as I told her, I said, I could have did this. You left the pamper in the washer when you put those clothes in. Why would you do that? Don't you know that could have messed up everything, that pamper could have fallen apart, that it could have ruined all those clothes and we would have had to wash everything again? Don't do that. Two key differences everybody. The first one is I was intentional about not using the word you. I focused on the situation and not the person, right? So I also was forward thinking. I didn't ask her why she did that because I know that she didn't do that on purpose, right? And if she did, then that's another conversation, right? But I'm assuming with very good reason that she didn't do it on purpose. And so when I told her that, she was, when I told her the first way, she's like, "Oh wow, pamper was in there. Shoot, okay, sorry about that." Um, as opposed to the second way, which the second way it was you did something wrong. It put blame on a specific person, individual, and then it was past thinking. We can't go into the past, anybody, right? We can't change that the pamper was in there. We can't go into the past, take it out of the bag, and make sure it doesn't get into the washer. That's never going to be a thing that you can do. So for any situation that you go through, don't be past thinking. Use the past to learn and do something different for the future, right? So I can talk to her about this and say, "Hey, I've learned from this. I'm going to make sure I'm not going to put a pamper in there. I'm going to make sure I double check something before tossing it into the washer." Right? But I'm not going to harp on why did you do this? Let's focus on the past. No, 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 no. That's not the point. People become defensive when we focus on them because then it becomes an attack on their character versus an attack on the situation. And if we're thinking about becoming collaborative, everybody, if we want to become collaborative in our conversations and our negotiations, we can't focus on the person and their action, but rather the outcome of a situation or the action of that situation. I hope that's clear. And we can't be past thinking. We have to be forward and continuous improvement thinking. That is an important piece. So if you take away anything, it's how you address people. And that's one of the specific ways of giving respect and mutual goals to one another. That's a really big thing in my opinion. So let's finish off and then we'll open up for any questions that may pop up. So I just want to reiterate, active listening and empathy. Those are going to be key for you. And then when it comes to yourself, just think about that self-awareness and how do you deal with some of your emotions, right? I've got these two kids now. I'm always trying to deal with my emotions. Yesterday, my 1-year-old, he's walking a lot though, everybody. He was walking at 10 months. So now he's crawling, he's climbing, he's jumping. And he slammed the door into me as I was taking out the trash. A little 1-year-old, I opened the door, I'm holding this big trash. I got this big box, he slams the door and I have to regulate myself. So he's one, I have to manage and control myself. I'm not going to explode on a 1-year-old. I know that he didn't have any ill intentions with that. So we need to think about this in every situation. Hopefully you're not the type of person that has road rage. I would start with that, right? Figure out how to handle that portion. And sometimes it's just the word choices that you use and how you talk to yourself. And then when we think about emotional intelligence enhancement, do some training maybe, right? Really practice this. Do something formal, whether it's an online course, a book that you're reading, or something. And then do the feedback and role play. Kind of as I said in the beginning, Roderick came to me and he said, "Hey, this happened," or let me get some feedback. Let's practice a few things. And then the last two pieces is I want you guys to transform how procurement is being looked at. I know that's a big task. I'm doing it one session at a time, one conversation with the supplier at a time, but I really want us to transform the way that we interact with our suppliers. Stop beating them up. Collaborate with them. Think about these mutual outcomes, these win-win situations. Please. They need it, we need it. So let's start that. I always tell people when the next Monday rolls around, think about something, just one thing even that you can do differently, right? Pick any of the things that I told you. My personal favorite is talking to people with an intentional use of your language and words. That to me would be a great thing to start on when the next Monday rolls around. You can be thinking about it, practicing about it until it gets up to that. But just do something different. So with that being said, Kathy, we have about 4 to 5 minutes left. I wanted to see if there are any questions. I know that we have a quiet group, but I am open to any questions at all. And hopefully we can just talk about some things together. But I also want to say thank you all as well for having me.
Oh, thank you, Brady. That was actually fantastic. I really enjoy this presentation so much because you not only took emotional intelligence, you actually told us how to use it in our negotiation skills, which I think is really important. And we don't always get that out of our presentations. I did get an early question when she started. Any advice for working with a micromanager?
Yes, yes. So I've had a couple of these in the past. I would say the first step is be honest. Be honest about how you feel about some of that and work collaboratively to figure out how to change it. And here's what I mean by that. A micromanager is a micromanager for a reason. Now, the reason's not going to be the same between all these different managers, but it's going to be up to you to have that conversation to dive deeper to figure out why. Now, it could be because they have not mastered the art of delegation, right? They don't know how to release control. It could be they don't trust you well enough, and you need to figure out how to gain their trust and how to be put into situations to gain their trust. And then to me, the third thing would be they don't have confidence that the outcome will be the outcome that they want. And some of that then becomes how do you ensure that you guys are going to reach a mutually agreeable outcome, right? So let's say you have a micromanager and they're stepping in every situation. You can simply ask, how do you want things to go? I think the key question is, at the very end of this project, what outcomes would you like for me to have achieved? Right? If they can list those things out, and then you as a worker can go out and achieve those things, that's one, building that trust, building the communication, and then you might get a little bit more space that then says they're not going to micromanage so much. But I will also say, if the main issue is the problem with them being able to delegate, that needs to be an open and honest two-way conversation that involves 360 feedback to them that says, hey, I think this might be an area of opportunity for your development as a manager. Like, you can manage up, but remember, everybody, do this respectfully and be very tactful with your word choices.
I also have a question. They want to know how they can follow more of your podcast or your presentations, your online programs.
Find me on LinkedIn. I am the only Brandon Hummons, everybody. So I've searched myself a lot. There's no other one. There's a couple other Hummons out there, and it's weird because they live in Chicago and we're not related. But if you find me on LinkedIn, I will post all of that. I'm doing every single month a webinar. And if you want to see me in action, I'm actually also doing workshops each month, right? So I'm actually doing hands-on activities during these workshops. So if you come to my workshop, you got to be prepared to talk. You got to be prepared to fill out some things. You got to be prepared to dive in. I usually do a case study or something along those lines where I set it up for you. Like, I'm doing a data buying workshop. How do you buy data better, right? I'm going to teach you first for the first 30 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes, you're going to run through a scenario. So I post all of this on my LinkedIn, and you'll see me there. I'm actually doing a data analytics class tomorrow through ISM. It'll be a 2-day course. It's too late to sign up, unfortunately, but there will be other things like that that come out where we can always work together and advance the world of procurement together.
Yeah, I did want to mention that he is a instructor for ISM, and just so you know, he's also very much involved with the ISM Chicago chapter as well.
Yes, and if you're in Chicago, if you're in Chicago and you come to ISM events, you'll see me there. I would love to see anybody in person, and I do a little traveling as well. You know, I might be out to the East Coast, New Jersey, Rochester, and New York at some point in the future. And I'm planning to be at ISM World Conference as well. I am not speaking this year, but next year it is on my list to speak. There's the head of the educational part of ISM who actually asked me already. I just said, hey, I don't know yet. I've got a lot of stuff going on. I got all these things I'm doing every single month. I don't want to put another thing on my plate, but it is my goal. ISM World 2025, I will be speaking there. So if you're there, it'd be great to see somebody in person. But I will be there this year, just as an attendee, walking around, meeting people, talking to suppliers.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to close out the program for today. I just wanted to let you, thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Brandon, for also joining us. And let me
Thank
see,
you.
at Brandon, looking forward to your hopeful Rochester, New York visit.
Wonderful. I'd be happy to come out. I might do that. My wife loves New York. We might just take a trip over there just to talk to people and learn a few things. So we'll see how it goes. But I really do appreciate it, Kathy. Thank you for having me. Thank you for trusting me to put this together and to teach people a little bit about connecting emotional intelligence in negotiation and procurement.
This is fantastic. This is not only great for your professional, but also for your personal well-being as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody, and a great week.
Thank you.